Today I reconcile the truest nature of my being and to that which I am certain I must be. For to be anything must surely be more aptly notable than to that which might have never been at all. For all that drives a man's carnal desire will still remain to devastate his soul. Indelibly a remnant awaiting elucidation, the more truthful exegesis that will somehow fulfill its worthless endeavor. Surely we will not endure the dictates of one's own mind, no matter how degraded, perverted, or reprobate they may be. For that exercise can only be the mind that has already succumbed to madness. Madness is for its own purpose as the flute is to his. We may not all agree to what is madness, but madness seems to for all too often be the hallmark of unrequited desire. The question then comes how to eradicate the desire before it takes the mind fully hostage. Answer: truth. Truth will set you free. The single most important objective we must all ever engage with is the quest for truth and knowledge, for we all know and agree that alone knowledge is power. If knowledge is power, then it stands to reason that the more you have, the more powerful you are. Based on this assumption, we therefore find ourselves at odds and discordance with the temporal world, that for all that we may wish otherwise are still very much rooted and confined within its constraints, invariably places upon us. This variance with the world remains at a brutal cross purpose that for all those who become aware of this unforeseen spiritual realm is not only at odds with our intention but engages in never-ending hostilities attributed directly to the willful surrender to that which it has to offer. What exactly does that mean if it be so? The simplest and easiest answer is most often the correct one. Whatever is of the world, carnal, temporal, or flesh, is by definition the world. Although the world is largely an unseen illusion, for this purpose we may safely remain with that which is seen and knowable to your senses. First of all, we need to have a reason for why these things are contrary to a spiritually evolved consciousness. First of all, and quite clearly, the most obvious reason we should seek to refute the world is the apparent, unambiguous, unmistakable reason, ephemeral, transitory nature. That is to say that something that is not of the spirit is manifestly inferior, on the same premise that it cannot fail to end at some point. Everything in and of this world is already dead, in a state of decay, or already passed into the dust of the past. The only thing that can ever remain is the ethereal memory we may at long last still remember. Beyond that incorporeal state it simply does not exist, and through hundreds of years of research and study, we may safely say that it will never return, for since the beginning all things have passed away. Also, there is nothing new under the sun, so what might that mean to us? We may safely assume that based on our knowledge of history and science, that empires and peoples all over the world are certainly aware that the incorporeal temporal world and everything in it is ultimately dies, decays, and reduced to ruin, unless of course it is carefully cared for, and even then it is not enough to suppose it will remain. The surest evidence of this fact is that man seems to have accepted this reality on some very basic level, because he continues to rebuild over and over the very same things, however imperfect and transitory it may be. I suppose with hopeful determinism that if he does it again, it will surely last longer, as he accumulates more knowledge to himself, for which he will employ to craft together the same dead worldly structures. It would appear that this process is consistent in every civilization and peoples everywhere. The simplest logic to this would be for two obvious reasons. One is that they serve a specific purpose, that they seek to continue or therefore need to rebuild a new one when the old one no longer is able to stand. The other is that it remains familiar to their experience, so to recreate collective mind would be more likely to participate in building such an elaborate structure that they are presumed to share the same familiar ideas and motivations that are needed to accomplish the task. Buildings and monolithic structures are not the only things that we speak of when we say the world. It must be understood that it is everything that the bodily or corporal, no matter what its purpose, use, or value. To venerate and hold to a worldly mind is the very antithesis of that which is spiritual. If we have been, however, brief and incomprehensible about what we define as worldly, then by the same reason anything other must be spirit. This definition is far too simplistic to offer a certitude of this understanding, but at the very least we may start the objective reasoning with what we have. This discussion does not come from a vacuum, as no such thing exists by this understanding, I must begin to exculpate my reasons for having this discussion. I seek to substantiate and justify my positions with truthful confirmation, supported with fact and science, in as much as that can be done. I think it rather best to maintain a certain degree of minimalism. It must first be set forth with empirical fact, founded and concluded to be understood as true and just, and not most basic elements before I attempt to incorporate the more divisive, indeed objectionable ideas. This will most certainly result in ad hominem attacks against me, because the Christian apologist cannot grasp the basic premise of my argument at the outset. To avoid the inevitable hostility and conflict, I will certainly evoke in said individuals it seems most prudent to start with the simplest, most basic elements of what can be agreed upon first. Otherwise, their own faith and belief will almost certainly not allow their minds to adequately accept that which they have no apparent experience of. One must first have an experience of something in order to recognize it in any way. If you never had the feeling of joy, no amount of academic knowledge I may supply you with would ever be sufficient to your understanding of what it means. It would be by definition remain meaningless to the person who never experienced it. So if we speak about emotions, and there are many from A to Z and all in between, we may do so with a clear understanding of what those emotions mean, but for only the reason that at some point in our lives we also experience this emotion, and for no other reason need be offered. You know your emotions because you have experienced them, and now you can identify them accordingly. Emotions are irrational by definition. All of them, therefore, they are not subject to change through the degree of rational discussion, which is the reason they are so dangerous. Emotions are experienced to the heart. Hence the proverb, all things the heart is deceitful most. Essentially meaning behind this is whatever your heart be consumed with is almost never the correct action you should take. To be more blunt, just because you may feel something strongly, it therefore must follow that that is the correct decision.